So how do you tell if you've got a big hitter? Good question. Usually that is what you are searching for with respect to your chairperson. One of the things that people find hard to believe is that often those calls to big hitters are some of the easiest calls. And the reason for it is they ask some pretty insightful questions, but they don't ask the question that most mentees are afraid of, which is, where are you going to get the money? Because they understand that capital will find a good idea and they're more interested in that. But I want to share with you, I'm not going to share his name, but I want to share with you an email I got this morning and then give some commentary on that. So it was, "Hi Bruce, 15 days after the board meeting, my chairman sent an email with an invoice for his flights, parking, and travel to come to the meeting," the board meeting he's talking about. "I sent him an email back to clarify if he was actually serious, and he confirmed that he wanted me to pay. His reply stated, personally, I would please need my out-of-pocket expenses settled as incurred. I would not be able to incur these with reimbursement being at risk in addition to my time and efforts. I'm looking for your advice on how to handle this." Okay, so basically he's saying that he can't handle the expenses. That is really not a typical big hitter response. Most of the time, and particularly with the amount of LOIs that this mentee has put together, which is the largest number of LOIs that I've ever experienced prior to a board meeting, they should be able to see we've got plenty of LOIs and we are on the doorstep of making this free equity that I was given actually pay off. And so to quibble over some travel expenses when you're about ready to realize the work that you've done and the equity will have value finally for some people, the just is out of step with what I would expect a big hitter to do. So I gave him 3 answers. 1, he could go ahead and pay it, which I would not recommend that he do, particularly since it sets a precedent up. 2, with respect to bonuses, expenses, etc., when cash flow of the business will allow it, sure, you'll reimburse those. But as you're building this, and most of the time the mentee is working out of their own budget, your board ought to recognize what they get and be able to handle those expenses. The second option I gave him was that I would tell him that we had X number of LOIs, we could see the finish line, and that the free equity is certainly within sight, which seems very fair against the costs incurred. You could also let him know that this was the only request that this mentee got to have reimbursement. And then lastly, you could tell him you'll pay the expenses when the business has cash flow. I would personally opt for number 2, which is everybody's got free equity, the founder's equity, and that we are on the doorstep. So no, you're not going to get reimbursed for this. Remember that boards are in transition, and so that certainly has a way of happening. And this mentee may be on the doorstep of needing to find a new chairman. It's just a strange request from a big hitter to reimburse some travel expenses like this. In an ongoing business, I get it, but in the startup mode, or actually I prefer not to use startup when I talk about what we're doing, in the initial stages where you're paying the cash flow yourself, and this mentee has invested a ton in letters and other expenses, it just seems out of whack. And I would, in terms of what he goes back to him, I'd probably also tell him that he's spent X number of dollars out of his pocket so that he frames that up. But you can learn a lot about your board with things like this. So good lesson to learn. Big hitters shouldn't make that request. And if they do, that to me is a very red flag. So if you're getting my emails, great. If not, go over to brucewhipple.com, grab the free class. That'll put you on the list. And there'll be boot camps there, free information, as I mentioned, so you'll be able to see the process. One of the mistakes I see, as we're now in the last third of the year, 4 months left here, is that people don't follow the steps, and you end up usually doing that at your own peril. The steps are there for a reason, important, and so make sure that you are doing that, following the steps and not getting ahead of yourself. You can go over to brucewhipple.com, and that's where all of these resources are.